Hey everyone, you hear about some people having a Passover meal and other people having something called a Passover Seder. Which one should we do? Are they both the same? Let's check it out. Shalom everybody, and welcome to Beit Tefillah. I have been absolutely inundated with questions lately and requested to do a video on Passover. How do we keep it? What's a Seder? Are we supposed to attend a Seder? Some are public, some are private. What are we supposed to do? So I'm going to attempt to answer the questions in this video today. First of all, you can keep a simple Passover meal that you can read about in Exodus 12, okay? Or you can keep something called a Seder. With some exceptions, of course, as not everything is done as it should be with some of these people, as we're going to find out shortly. We're going to talk about the dangers of having a public Passover celebration, whether it's just a simple meal or a Seder or a whole pile of people from the public that get invited to come and join some of these crazy things. We're going to discuss it, okay? But first I want to talk about the Seder. The Seder, or Seder, as some like to pronounce it, is one of the most common Jewish rituals. Keep in mind that I said Jewish for this for now, because we know the Moedim and feasts are Yahuwah's feasts, and not just Jewish. Elohim commanded his people Yisrael to keep Passover in Judaism celebration, or how they commonly hold it, is called a Seder. Now, Seder is simply a Passover feast that coincides with the first night of unleavened bread. It's all good. There's just a few differences to it, okay? You may also hear it called the week of Passover, where they'll kind of combine that Passover night with the whole week of unleavened bread. They'll just call that the whole week of Passover, okay? A Passover Seder, and Seder means like order or arrangement, is a Jewish ritualistic feast which marks the beginning of the scriptural moed or feast known as Passover. It is held on the evening of the 15th day of Nisan on the Hebrew calendar all around the world. The Seder is a ritual performed by multiple generations of a family, or it can be like a whole bunch of people in one community, which involves the retelling of the liberation of the Israel people from slavery in ancient Egypt. This story is from the book of Exodus, the scriptures. The Seder itself is based on the biblical verse commanding the people who are Yisrael to retell the story of the Exodus from Exodus 13:8. And you shall inform your son in that day, saying, it is because of what Yahuwah did for me when I came up from Mitzrayim. Traditionally, the families and friends will gather in the evening to read the text of the Haggadah, which is an ancient work derived from the Mishnah. The Haggadah contains a narrative of the Israelite exodus from Egypt, along with special blessings, some rituals, some commentaries from the Talmud, and also some Passover songs. Seder customs include the telling of the story, discussing of the story, drinking 4 cups of wine, eating matzah, partaking of symbolic foods placed on the Passover Seder plate, and reclining in a celebration of freedom. There's many steps to a Jewish Seder. Let me mention each step briefly. There are Hebrew names to all these steps, but I'm just going to read the definitions of the steps themselves. The first one is the recital or a sanctifying Kiddush blessing and drinking of the first cup of wine. Then the washing of the hands, then the dipping of the karpas, which is the raw vegetables, and that's usually done in salt water. Breaking of the middle matzah, the larger piece becomes the afikomen or the dessert. Retelling of the Passover story, including the recital of the 4 questions, and drinking the second cup of wine. Then we have the second washing of the hands. Then we have the blessing before eating the matzah. Then eating of the maror, which is the bitter herbs per the command. Eating of a sandwich made of matzah and the maror. And then we have the serving of the holiday meal. Then the eating of the afikomen, which is the half piece of matzah that was broken off earlier. The blessing after the meal and the drinking of the third cup of wine. And then you have the recital of the Hallel, which is traditionally recited on festivals, and the drinking of the 4th cup of wine. And then everyone says, next year in Jerusalem. And that's typically, roughly, how a Jewish Seder goes. They are keeping the commanded feast of Passover, they're eating the unleavened bread, and retelling the story just as commanded in Exodus and reinforced in Leviticus chapter 23. So, that's one option that can be done. However, now I'm going to go into something different. When people go nuts and they twist things, and if they want to have these public things, and I don't care under what group or what kind of faith they have, sometimes people just go crazy, okay? Keep in mind that atheists or agnostics also put up Christmas trees. They also color Easter eggs because they don't want to be left out of the party when so many other people are doing it. You're going to have different groups that are going to put their own spin on things in this wicked day and age, and they're literally playing with fire when they do something so horrific to Passover, whether they just hold a Passover gathering or hold a Passover Seder. And it's for the public or it's for some kind of crazy cause. There's a few different kinds of Passover celebrations or Seders in today's lovely day and age. Let's check out a few of them that anyone can look up by merely looking on Wikipedia. First, we're going to visit the feminist Seder. In 1976, the first women-only Passover Seder was held in Esther M. Bronner's New York City apartment with 13 women attending, including Gloria Steinem. You remember Gloria Steinem? Such a lovely lady. The original Women's Seder has been held with the Women's Haggadah every year since 1976, and women-only Seders are now held by some congregations as well. Some Seders, including the original Women's Seder but not limited to women's-only Seders, now set out a cup for the prophet Miriam as well as a traditional cup for the prophet Elijah, sometimes accompanied by a ritual to honor Miriam, because that's just biblical and all, right? Miriam's cup originated in the 1980s in a Boston Rosh Hashanah group. Miriam's cup is linked to the Midrash of Miriam's well, which is a rabbinic legend that tells of a miraculous well that accompanied the Israelites during their 40 years in the desert at the Exodus from Egypt. Furthermore, some Jews include an orange on the Seder plate. The orange represents the fruitfulness for all Jews when all marginalized people are included, particularly women and gay people. Susanna Herschel was introduced to an early feminist Haggadah that suggested adding a crust of bread on the Seder plate as a sign of solidarity with Jewish lesbians. As some would say, there's as much room for a lesbian in Judaism as there is for a crust of bread on the Seder plate. In addition, each orange segment had a few seeds that had to be spit out, a gesture of spitting out and repudiating the homophobia of traditional Judaism. You know, that makes me feel... How does that make me feel? That's how I feel. Okay. Moving on, because we can't let the feminists have all the fun, is the Christian Seder. Some Christians, especially but not only evangelical Protestants, have recently taken great interest in performing Seders according to the ancient rubric. Many churches host Seders, usually adding a Christian message and many times inviting Messianic Jews to lead and teach on it. Many Christians cite the meal as a way to connect with the heritage of their own religion and to see how the practices of the ancient world are still relevant to Christianity today. Well, they were lawless back then too, right? They put their own Christian spin on it, I guess, as it gives some kind of Christian message to it, whatever that means. But wait, we can't have just the feminists and Christians having all the fun. We have to have an interfaith Seder. A number of churches hold interfaith Seders where Jews and non-Jews alike are invited to share in the story and discuss the common themes of peace, freedom, and religious tolerance. It should be noted that these themes are only peripherally referenced in a traditional Jewish Seder. During the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, interfaith Seders energized and inspired leaders from various communities who came together to march for equal protection for all. That's a good thing, actually, but a Seder isn't the place for that. The first of these, the Freedom Seder, was written by Arthur Wasco and was performed on April 4th, 1969 at Lincoln Memorial Temple in Washington, D.C. It was the first Haggadah to go beyond the original biblical story. Because why stick to the scriptures, right? It sparked a large number of Haggadahs celebrating various other forms of liberation, feminism, vegetarianism, and the liberation movements in Latin America in the 1970s, ecological healing, etc., and so on and so forth. Today, many Unitarian Universalist congregations hold annual interfaith community Seders. Is it okay to have a pizza and beer Seder too? I mean, seriously, where do we stop with this if we can write new Haggadahs to play this however we want and support whatever non-biblical cause we feel like supporting? Boy, the insanity is just off the hook with some of these people. Okay, back to the Passover and away from all this craziness. Well, we should stop here and read some scripture about Passover and the week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread. Let's start with Leviticus 23, 5 and 6. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Passover to Yahuwah. And on the 15th day of this month is the festival of unleavened bread to Yahuwah. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And here's the extensive command from Exodus 12 about the Passover. We're going to read it all from Exodus 12, 1 to 20. And Yahuwah spoke to Moses and to Aharon in the land of Mitzrayim, saying, This month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year for you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th day of this month, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the beings. According to each man's need, you make your count for the lamb. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year-old male. Take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it between the evenings. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. And they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw, nor boil it all with water, but roast it in fire, its head with its legs and its inward parts. Do not leave it until the morning, and what remains of it until morning you are to burn with fire. And this is how you eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. You will eat it in haste. It is the Passover of Yahuwah. And I shall pass through the land of Mitzrayim on that night, and shall smite all the firstborn in the land of Mitzrayim, both man and beast. And on all the mighty ones of Mitzrayim I shall execute judgment. I am Yahuwah. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. When I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and let the plague not come on you, to destroy you when I smite the land of Mitzrayim. And this day shall become to you a remembrance, and you shall observe it as a festival to Yahuwah throughout your generations. Observe it as a festival, an everlasting law. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Indeed, on the first day you shall cause leaven to cease from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that being shall be cut off from Yisrael. And on the first day is a set-apart gathering, and on the 7th day you have a set-apart gathering. No work at all is done on them, only that which is eaten by every being, that alone is prepared by you. And you shall guard the festival of unleavened bread, for on this same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Mitzrayim. You shall guard this day throughout your generations, an everlasting law. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month in the evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened, that same being shall be cut off from the congregation of Yisrael, whether sojourner or native of the land. Do not eat that which is leavened. In all of your dwellings you are to eat unleavened bread. So, after reading all that, we need to go examine some of these problems with the public Passover celebrations or Seders that are open to the public. Apparently they're not aware of Exodus 12:43 to 48. And Yahuwah said to Moses and Aharon, This is the law of the Passover. No son of a stranger is to eat of it. But any servant a man has bought for silver, when you have circumcised him, then let him eat of it. A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it. It is eaten in one house, and you are not to take any flesh outside of your house, nor are you to break any bone of it. All the congregation of Israel are to perform it. And when a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover to Yahuwah, let all of his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and perform it. And he shall be as a native of the land, but let no uncircumcised eat of it. So when they try to do something biblical, how is it they can do it when they don't follow the Bible when it comes to the details? It's not going to work. Of all the scriptural feasts, Passover is the only one that is restricted to those who are in covenant. No stranger is to eat of it. It was crystal clear, plain as day. You must be in covenant and be Yisrael to partake of it. The Messiah came only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. To everyone else he said, he will say, Depart from me, I never knew you. Why wouldn't he know someone? Because they wouldn't be in covenant or in his family known as Israel. They aren't keeping the laws of Elohim, which makes them lawless, and why he will say to them, Depart from me, you who are lawless. Some people can't seem to get that no matter how many times you tell that verse to them. That's that veil. Others are welcome at all the other feasts, but not on Passover. Only those who are in covenant. Those partaking of this moed, of this feast, all the men have to be circumcised. We just heard that 3 different times in that last little bit of scripture we just read. So at these public parties and these public Seders and stuff, is someone checking the coats and then checking down the pants of the men? You know, I doubt it. Not that they should, but you know what I mean. As with those who are strangers and those who are uncircumcised, there are others who are unable to participate in the Passover meal. Those who are unclean are not fit to partake of the lamb, as we're told in Numbers 9:6-7. But there were men who were defiled for being of a man, so they were not able to perform the Passover on that day. So they came before Moses and Aaron on that day, and those men said to him, "We are defiled for the being of a man. Why are we withheld from bringing near the offering of Yahuwah at its appointed time among the children of Israel?" Now, there's a number of things which can make one biblically unclean or defiled. It is the responsibility of the children of Israel to know these things. It is expected of us to be able to distinguish the clean from the unclean and to guard against uncleanness. I'm not going to go into all the different types of things that makes one unclean. That's easily researched, okay? Leviticus 10:10. So as to make a distinction between the set apart and the profane, and between the clean and the unclean. We should know this. Okay, if we're in covenant, if we're keeping this Passover meal, that's something we should know. It's not something the public should know. That's why the public shouldn't be invited. Now, some people, whether they're unclean, either from coming into contact with a dead person or for any other reason, are not fit to partake of the Passover, as we just read. But thankfully, concession was made to ensure that all the children of Israel could still partake of it. As we read Numbers 9:10-12. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when any male of you or your generation is unclean for a being, or is far away on a journey, he shall still perform the Passover of Yahuwah. On the 14th day of the 2nd month, between the evenings, they perform it. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs they eat it. They do not leave of it until morning, and they do not break a bone of it. According to all the laws of the Passover, they perform it. So all the rules still apply. It was just held a month later. Hopefully those who were unclean for the first offering would make sure they would be clean so they could partake of it in the 2nd month. These things have not changed. They are an everlasting covenant. So people need to make sure that they set themselves apart, as this covenant meal is very specific and not to be taken lightly. Okay? These are commandments, by the way, and not my opinion on the matter. As for all these public Passover celebrations or Seders, who is making sure these people are in covenant and keeping the Torah, all the Moedim, the Sabbath? Who's making sure that they're circumcised and they're not unclean or undefiled? The Christians sure aren't. Christians said, oh, that stuff was done away with at the cross, or that's just for the Jews. So why are they even playing around with the Passover? You know, they never had any part of it. Now they're just curious and they want to start messing with it. You know, I really don't get it. They're bringing a great judgment upon themselves, and so is everyone else who is hosting a public Passover shindig. Commandments. They're guidelines and instructions that we are to guard forever. Elohim doesn't change, and we're told that. But if you're going to break these commandments and do whatever you want, you know, then really, what's the point, I guess? These people aren't sticking to the scriptural narrative, and they're just doing whatever they want, I guess, if you throw out the word. The Messiah said in Matthew 15:3, why do you also transgress the command of Elohim? Because of your tradition. Some people need to think good and hard about what he said there, especially all the people who think they can invent a new tradition or a way to celebrate Passover. If you don't want to do a Seder, you can just do a simple meal if you just follow the instructions in Exodus 12 for eating your meal of lamb roasted over fire, eaten in haste with bitter herbs and unleavened bread, and you can read out loud to your family and your children that same account in Exodus and explain why we eat this meal today and what the week-long feast of unleavened bread is all about and what it memorializes. Okay? And that way you can keep the Passover and guard it as well. Now there's some more I'd like to add to this video due to the large number of questions that I received as of late. As for Passover, we know we don't sacrifice a lamb today, as our Messiah replaced that spotless lamb that was there as a temporary covering for sin until he came to be a permanent removal of it. Some people will just go buy lamb at the store and eat that and be fine with it, and other people are going to have a problem with it, citing in Exodus where it states that we are to take a yearling male without blemish and don't break a bone of it. And who knows what they did with the meat in the store? Who knows if it's a male? Who knows if it's a yearling? Who knows if it was blemished? Who knows if a bone was broken? Who knows if they even killed it properly? We don't know that with store-bought meat. We don't know any of that. We've killed a yearling male lamb on Passover. We spilled its blood and covered the blood up with dust. We roasted it with fire and bitter herbs and ate it in haste and burned the rest of it up by morning. Done that a couple of times. But before we could do that, before we found a source where we could get lamb, we just had to make do the best we could with store-bought or whatever. Not everybody is capable of doing something like that. I've had people write me that were pretty upset and said, oh, we got kids and they don't want to go out there and see this lamb's throat cut and all that stuff. Well, you know, you don't have to do that. Do what the scripture says, get in with another family. It's not required that everyone eats 3 pounds of lamb. You know, no, that's not what it is. You have to eat some of it. You know, go in with families and find a way to do it, but do it in plenty of time. Don't say, oh, Passover's in 30 minutes, we got lamb, right? No, you know, find a way well beforehand to where you can get it, okay? Find a way where you can get it. And also, not everyone is set up for that. Not everyone lives near a farm. I mean, if you try taking that lamb up to your apartment in Manhattan and slit its throat, the cops are going to show up and you're probably going to get an eviction notice. No, not everybody can do it, and not everybody is set up for that. So try to find a source for it in plenty of time, okay? And some people are going to eat something other than lamb. Their figuring is that since there doesn't need to be a lamb sacrificed and that it's just a memorial meal, why do they need to have lamb? They'll say, well, the lamb that had to be killed was only in place until the Messiah came to replace that lamb, and now it's simply a memorial meal, and we don't need lamb specifically. No more animal sacrifices, thereby no more lamb to be killed. Yeah, and I can understand why they're thinking that way. I really can at all. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do. I'm not going to tell anybody what not to do. People need to read Exodus chapter 12 and Numbers chapter 9 for themselves and pray about it. Whatever we do, we need to realize once again that this is a memorial meal. It's not a sacrifice, okay? Animals had to be sacrificed back in the day for a temporary sin covering. We know that until the Messiah got here. And that's why we don't have animal sacrifices today. I'm sure we all recognize that, and we don't want to somehow invalidate what the Messiah did for us by having some kind of lamb sacrifice for Passover. That's not what it's about. Referring to the Passover meal during the breaking of bread at his Last Supper, he said to keep Passover in remembrance of him. Now let's get on to some things about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. First of all, I want to say right up front, let's not forget that the first day and the seventh day of this week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread are both no servile work days. Can't go to work on those days, okay? Let's not forget about that. I wanted to mention that up front. During the week of Unleavened Bread, we are commanded to eat unleavened bread for the entire week. So we need to remember that every day. Doesn't mean you have to eat it with every meal, and it doesn't mean you got to eat gobs and gobs of it. Just eat a little unleavened bread each and every day. That's the command, okay? You can eat a lot of other things besides unleavened bread, of course. Eat regular meals. Just don't eat anything leavened with it. Make sure that you have unleavened bread with at least one of your meals. Now, before this week of unleavened bread starts, we are commanded that we need to get all yeast or any bread type products, anything made with yeast like that. We're supposed to get all that out of our home. So let's try to look in all the places where we may be forgetting about, okay? Let's not forget about any bread or some hoagie rolls that are on the bottom of the deep freezer. Let's not forget croutons for the salad or any boxes of bread stuffing or breadcrumbs that you might have for cooking, things like that. Take the trash out. Don't forget to empty the crumbs out of the toaster. Most people forget about that. Some cereal has yeast in it, is made with yeast. You need to check on that too. Some of our soda crackers don't have yeast in it. They're made with baking soda. That's listed as leavening in the ingredients. Baking soda is not biblical leavening. I did a video on that entitled Is Baking Soda Leavening? I'm going to link that in the description below for anyone who hasn't seen that video yet. Baking soda is not leavening. A little bit of baking soda is not going to leaven the whole lump. Okay, it's talking about yeast and stuff like that. Some things may be made with yeast, but we need to remember that this is about unleavened bread. That's what this feast is about. For instance, yeast is used to ferment wine. You don't need to get wine out of your house. Some people even have it with their Passover Seder during their week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, it's not like any little microscopic bits or yeast are going to somehow come out of that wine when it's usually all filtered out anyway, and it's dead. It's not going to come back to life and leaven any of your bread. That's not going to happen. But I will say, if you make wine or beer at your house, all I can say is I would make sure none of that would be fermenting in my house on Passover or during the week of unleavened bread. No way. Also, let's make sure to beware of any non-believers who may be coming over for a visit. If grandma's coming over and she's bringing you a big box of bread, make sure she doesn't bring anything like that over during the week of unleavened bread. We don't want anything like that to come into our house, okay? So tell Granny to come next week. Also, Christianity thinks communion has replaced Passover. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Last Supper was definitely not a Passover meal, no matter what anybody tells you, okay? I did a video on that called Christianity's Communion is a Fraud. I'll link that below. That gives 100% scriptural proof of exactly how and why the Last Supper was not a Passover meal. Now, you can bring leaven and bread and all that stuff back into your house, and you can eat it again after sunset on the seventh day, because the Feast of Unleavened Bread is over, okay? The command was fulfilled. Now, I'm not really going to discuss first fruits or Shavuot, which is also known as Pentecost, in this video, but please read Leviticus 23 and you can research that on your own because it goes right along with this. I also want to say right near the end of this video that if some of this is overwhelming you, please try not to let it. Okay? I know some of this is quite the contrast to what people were taught in churchianity, so I suggest if this is going to be your first Passover, and if you're in covenant, and if you meet the requirements, talk to somebody who's done this before. Maybe visit somebody and let them explain what they're doing with their Passover meal or what they're doing with their Seder. If you have any Jewish friends, that would be great. That would help take a little bit of the pressure off. And you see, it's a joyous time. We're celebrating liberation, right? Freedom from bondage, and that's what it's all about. Okay, that's why we're told to do this every year. It's a wonderful thing. This is going to feel a little bit awkward for some people at first. I know that because they're used to eating Easter ham luncheons or, you know, Christmas Eve dinners and stuff with the whole family. Once you've had a Passover dinner and you celebrated the week-long feast of unleavened bread a couple of times, it's going to feel not only natural, but you're going to get a sense of knowing that what you are doing now is very pleasing to Elohim. It's kind of a do the deed to see the need type of thing. And we need to remember that all of the Moed, all of the feasts, are holy convocation, which means they're set apart rehearsals. We're rehearsing. We're the bride, right? You rehearse for a wedding. Well, we're rehearsing. These are set apart convocations, set apart rehearsals. We're rehearsing, and nobody's going to be doing them all 100% right, no matter what we're doing. We're all trying, but nobody's going to be on the same page until the Messiah comes back and puts us as such. But the more you do it, the more you'll be able to see the truth in it, because Elohim is going to teach you. And then pretty soon it'll be wonderful, and you'll be just as excited to keep some of these feasts as you were when you were back in churchianity and you were, you know, looking forward to Easter, or you were looking forward to Christmas or whatever. And these are even better because you know in your heart that it pleases Elohim. You know He's hearing your prayers because you're walking in favor, you're walking in His word, you're doing what He said, and it's just a wonderful thing. For those who will listen, we are only a remnant. And the further we go, it seems that path gets narrower and narrower. And it sure does. The longer you walk it, the more that you're on it, it seems like it's getting tighter. But it only figures because Elohim said, I will refine my people. He said, I'm going to test you to see if you're going to walk in my ways. Are you going to be set apart to me? Or are you going to be mixed in with some of that other junk that the world does? So we have to be set apart. We have to obey Him to the best that we can. And that's all we're trying to do. So I hope this video blessed you, and I hope it answered a lot of questions. I know people had a lot of questions. I hope I hit them all in this video, and I hope it brought a little bit of deeper understanding to what some people were looking for. It's really it's a beautiful thing, and it feels great to be in covenant and to be partaking of this meal and partaking of this week-long feast that is symbolic of living by the pure word of Elohim without any traditions mixed in. And that's the best thing we can do, is to worship Him in spirit and truth, just like we're commanded. So, to all those scattered worldwide in the dispersion, shalom from all of us here at Beit Tefillah Productions. And whether you are keeping a simple Passover meal or a Passover Seder, be blessed this Passover or Pesach. Shalom.